For action to be taken against lobby group Afriforum and Solidarity following their trip to the White House in the United States. President Cyril Ramaphosa has slammed the groups for what he says is sowing divisions in the country. The lobby organization says they went to the United States to request funding from the Trump administration to support Afrikaner development. Now, for more on that, I'm joined by Jaco Kleynhans, head of international relations at the Solidarity movement, who is part of the lobby group's delegation to the United States. Jaco, good afternoon, and thank you for coming on this afternoon. The Chamber of Commerce in the United States has raised some concern around what communication this particular visit actually tends to project about the situation in South Africa, and creating maybe cross-communication or divergent communication when it's government that should be handling that type of communication. What is your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's not correct, and we even view that in a sense as a bit dishonest, you know. And I mean, the SA Chamber of Commerce here in America has a very specific political agenda. The chairman of that Chamber of Commerce is also an ANC member. He was a councillor in Ekurhuleni. So there's a very specific agenda. We've been very clear about our decision to visit Washington, D.C. this week, and very honest about our message. We even published our document that we handed over to the White House, to members of Congress, to the Department of State. We published that online. So we've been very honest on what our message were. There were absolutely no disinformation taking place here, and the idea that only governments are allowed to lobby other governments or talk to other governments are also dishonest. There are hundreds of groups lobbying American politicians every day here in Washington, D.C. And that are trade unions, the private sector, certain economic sectors, also from South Africa. Solidarity and the Solidarity movement just did that the last few days to lobby on behalf of our members for certain issues that we are concerned about.
Yeah. Others are saying it's not a nation-building process. Some political parties have viewed this, and I think even President Cyril Ramaphosa would have weighed in on this, as saying it is not a nation-building process, but rather a way of communicating to the world that there is no way of sitting down as a country and resolving our problems as a country.
Yes, I mean, we would have preferred the whole events of the last 3 weeks to play out differently. To give you an idea, we wrote to President Ramaphosa the day after President Trump signed that executive order on South Africa. We wrote a letter to President Ramaphosa. We reached out directly to him because we've been in direct contact with President Ramaphosa over the last few months about other issues in South Africa. And we also reached out to his chief of staff to say that we must talk about this. The Solidarity movement do have very good contacts within the Trump administration, and we must look at how to resolve this diplomatic crisis. And our agenda is very clear on that. We've said that to President Ramaphosa, and it's still the same. We are extremely concerned about the loss of humanitarian aid, and especially the possible loss of access to the American market for South African producers. So if we talk about nation building, I think one of the most important things in terms of nation building in South Africa is that we do solve our problems of unemployment, of low economic growth, of poverty in South Africa. And I think that's something where the Solidarity movement and our members, who are more than 600,000 people, make a huge contribution with. If we do lose this access to the American markets, you know, we will have a much bigger crisis in South Africa. Yeah. So if we do talk about nation building, we asked President Ramaphosa, and we're still asking him that, is to rather see us as a friend in this process and not as an enemy, because we're not an enemy of the South African government.
It's precisely that which the SA Chamber of Commerce in the United States is worried about, that you are making pronouncements on things like AGOA, which is really a purview of the government of South Africa, not an interest group looking for an interest of particular race or individuals.
Yeah, I mean, that's completely untrue and dishonest. You know, over the last 12 months, there was delegations from many different economic sectors and industries in South Africa to lobby here in Washington to lobby the American government and AGOA. There were delegations from the South African mining industry, from the agricultural industry, from the chemical industry, from the motor manufacturing industry. There were people from other political parties, even parties within the Government of National Unity, who came on their own here to Washington, D.C. to lobby the American government. We gave a report on AGOA to members of the Foreign Relations Committee in the American Congress who need to make a decision on AGOA within the next few months before September. And we've put out a very strong case for why South Africa must still be part of AGOA next year. We laid out the case for South Africa not to be removed from AGOA. I think in that sense, we've acted to the benefit of South Africa, like many other lobby groups in South Africa already tried to do over the last few months. So what we did here the last 5 days during this visit in Washington, D.C. is not something strange. It's not something that don't happen. And it's not something that other groups in South Africa don't also do.
And are you concerned about the possible fallout, the backlash that could possibly ensue because of this particular visit?
Yes, we are very concerned about that. We are especially concerned about the anger and the kind of messages and reaction from people within government, from people within the ANC, from certain activists, you know, and who are constantly telling lies about the motives of our visit to Washington, D.C. We could do, it was very possible for us to simply come to Washington, not to tell anyone, you know, to meet with all our contacts, and we have great contacts in the White House and in the American government and in Congress. And just go back to South Africa. What we've been very honest with the South African people. We've made it public, you know. We've said we're coming here. We warned and we said we're on our way. This is the document that we will hand over to the White House. And then the reaction was, oh, but you're dishonest and you're spreading disinformation. I haven't seen one single part of proof of any disinformation that we've spread in the last 5 days. But then there's also this thing that, this reaction, especially from the president, saying that, but we don't try to solve our problems within South Africa. And that's also not honest. We've reached out to leadership within the ANC, within government, within President Ramaphosa's own office, you know. So we really want to work things out within South Africa, but I think it was very necessary. Just if you analyze the depth of this crisis in the relationship between South Africa and America, it was really necessary for us to visit America at this point.
You might be able to maintain your good relations, but I'm talking here more the fallout on the deteriorating relations, particularly involving the economic assistance and the trade agreements, which if we are frankly speaking, is not something that is in the control of Afriforum, it's in the control of government.
Yeah, well, it may be in control of government, but we can have a great influence on that, you know, and we do have influence on that with the American government. We do have they're listening to us. The current Trump administration are listening to our points on and our arguments on why they must not implement economic sanctions against South Africa. There's good reasons why the Trump administration didn't decide the last 3 weeks to implement economic sanctions, maybe even import duties on South African products like they've done with many other countries. And I think we played an important part in that, you know, to state with the American government what reasons there are. The problem is, and I must be very honest with you, I don't think that the South African government currently have much credibility with the Trump administration, and that is worrying to me. There's a feeling here in Washington, D.C. amongst politicians, and I mean, we're just listening to that the South African government on a global level, internationally, works against the interests of America, you know, and I think, therefore, that's something that the South African government need to deal with. That's not our area of expertise. We can't do much about that.
And how is your campaign assisting in that particular reputation or perception that America has? Others would say it's making things even worse.
Well, you can only state the truth, you know. I mean, to be honest with you, the American government knows much more about South Africa's dealings with other countries like Iran, Russia, China, and so forth, than what we know about. You know, the Solidarity movement aren't any specialists on those issues. You know, we focus on what our issues are. I think what we contribute is to keep a channel open with the American government, you know, to put out arguments to the American government on how they can react to the issues that are concerning to them, you know, and they have very specific concerns, like the South African government's case against Israel, working with Iran on nuclear issues. There's very specific issues that the American government have with the South African government. Our message this week was very clear. Don't do things that will harm normal South Africans, normal working South Africans who work in all these industries that export to America, or normal South Africans who benefit from humanitarian aid from America. So I think we made this very, very strong case on those issues. The American government need to decide how they will react on the things that the South African government do that angers them. And I think that is where it's very important that we need a message from the South African government that they are willing to negotiate with the Trump administration and that they are willing to work to some kind of agreement, to reach some kind of agreement with President Trump.
Now, although, of course, funding has been withdrawn not only to South Africa, but to other countries as well, there is, of course, a local and direct impact to South Africa as far as health is concerned. But the question is, you still went, America still once again pursued their line of policy that they would want to pursue. There is nothing that Afriforum could have said to them to change from that route that they were taking.
Oh, we've said much to them that are still preventing them or rethinking possible economic sanctions. I can tell you what happened in the last 3 weeks, and especially the executive order from President Trump wasn't an event. It's part of a process. And the current American administration are looking at many different options: individual sanctions, economic sanctions, the possibility of kicking South Africa out of AGOA. They are looking at all kinds of things that they consider, further steps that they consider to take against South Africa. Yeah. I think what we contributed on that is to tell them, don't take economic sanctions against South Africa now. Don't implement that. Look at alternatives, you know. I think in that sense, we contributed. I mean, the issue on the PEPFAR funding and the humanitarian aid, you're absolutely correct. I mean, the Trump administration, they made a decision that influenced their humanitarian aid across the board, all around the world, you know. So we're not going to tell the Trump administration not to review all their humanitarian aid around the world. We did give them arguments on why we believe it is important to bring that funds back to South Africa, especially the PEPFAR funding. But I think we made a very, very strong case for why the Trump administration must not take economic sanctions against South Africa.
So you're saying you stopped the Trump administration from implementing economic sanctions against South Africa, your visit. Is that what you're claiming?
Well, we hope so. You know, we at least hope so and believe that's one of the things that we can achieve, you know, and we will have to see what happens in the next few weeks. But if you look at the Trump administration's relations with other countries, Mexico, Canada, Panama, Colombia, you can name many other countries, the first step that they took was to implement import duties and economic sanctions. South Africa haven't seen economic sanctions in the last 3 weeks. I think we made a very strong case that they must not go that route, you know, that they must not implement economic sanctions against South Africa. It may happen next week, it may happen in 6 months, but we will go on with our access to the American administration to ask from them not to go that route.
But you see, these are that's why I've a problem with that, because these are things that are happening within a framework of law, within a framework of commitments that happen between countries. It's not something that an Afrikaner interest group can come and change a government position on.
Oh, we can. Absolutely, we can. You know, I mean, we represent a a specific strong constituency in South Africa and in the South African economy. We represent many farmers in South Africa that will export to America. During certain parts of the year, lots of citrus fruit here in America are imported from America. There's really strong arguments from our side that the American government must not take that route. You know, if you're going to implement a 25% tariff on South African agricultural exports to America, that will have a destructive effect on the South African agricultural sector, especially in the Western Cape, but it will also have an influence on the availability of certain food products here in America. And we represent thus a very strong constituency in agriculture, in the chemical industry, the car manufacturing industry. The American government took us serious, and they're still taking us very serious because we are talking on behalf of an important and very strong constituency in South Africa.
Are you ready to present contradictory statistics on crime? The Minister of Police saying he's awaiting your arrival back home?
Yes. Yes, absolutely. We're going to do that. You know, one of our organizations in the Solidarity movement, Afriforum, and you referred to them, they, as a unit who compile crime statistics and specifically statistics on farm attacks and farm murders, and they have very good reports, and we will next week present those data to the minister, but we will also make it public, you know, because again, I think it's very important to say that the public need to know what the truth is and what the reality is. We have the statistics of all farm attacks and farm murders of the last 40 years, actually, from the late 1980s, available in a database, you know. So it's all out there, and we will certainly make it public soon.
Appreciate your time, Jaco. Thanks very much for coming on. Jaco Kleynhans, Head of International Relations at the Solidarity Union there. Right, Kwena.